Hey there folks, and welcome to something a little bit different. I was going to do a pretty simple Workbench Wednesday today, then I figured I might do something a little different because folks had seen on Blue Sky a post where I put up a couple of very quickly painted parts of buildings, these ruined wall sections. And the question came up, well, how did you do those? And blessedly, they're incredibly quick. Now I'm lucky enough that I actually have a spare. There was a 9th piece that I didn't paint yesterday, so I figured what I'd do would be to go ahead and prime that one, and I'll show you what I did yesterday. So we'll keep this nice and quick. There are going to be alternate colors in the description too, if you want to follow along with the gray method that I've used in the background there too. But yeah, I thought I'd get some toys out so you can see what this all looks like in context. Anyhow, let's get to the painting. So here we've got the extra piece that I mentioned, and as you can see, it's been assembled. These are designed that they have the open lock clips in them, but I actually prefer, once the clips are in, I've glued them in place and I've made sure that this is glued together with PVA. Now a quick note on the actual printing of these things. You'll see in some areas that they are a little bit rough, and that's deliberate on my part. Rather than printing them with a standard profile, what I've actually done is cut these down to 1 wall each rather than 2, and with just 8% infill. Now what that means, because there's only one outer wall, the actual surface that we see, there are some areas where it would normally rely on the interior wall being printed first and then the exterior one being printed over the top of it so it has something to stick onto. So you might see, if you print them in the same way that I do, a little bit of stringing in some areas. It's not a huge issue, but if it does happen, at least you know why. Now because I've also only given them 1 wall, they're quite thin and pretty translucent when the light hits them. So importantly, I've started with a primer first of black, and then I've gone over that primer with a little bit of Zandri dust. Now the Zandri dust is the color that I actually want to prime with, but it also gives us a little bit of texture and some variation, a bit of gradient in color. Pretty handy for what we're going to do. So what we're going to start with is some Morghast bone. Now I have here one of my old makeup brushes. Something nice and soft is going to be good for this. I bought the bunch of these off of eBay years ago now, so don't ask. They're nice and cheap, and they work super well for this kind of large, blotchy application we're going for. So I've loaded it up with a little bit of Morghast bone, and now we're just going to dibble-dabble it on. Very, very technical terms here. Now in some areas, if you want a slightly different texture, just pick your brush down and give it a little circular scrubbing motions. Now what I'm looking to do here mostly is come near any edges of detail. So for example, if I was doing this on the front of this section, I would be avoiding the windows, there we go, the window sections. It doesn't need to be particularly careful. Then once I've laid down a bit of this on the flat areas, what I'll do is load my brush up with a little bit more, not take quite as much off, and then just lightly flick along the brickwork as well. Now this will not take you very long, and as you're working you'll find that you end up with less and less paint on your brush, so you can get into different areas. You're always looking to leave just a little bit of that Zandri dust visible, either at the edges of detail or in places where you want a little bit of depth. Now make sure that that's had plenty of time to dry, because we are going to apply quite a lot of fluid over the top of it. So what I've got is red leather. Now this is a wonderful brick color from Vallejo. I'm going to pop out just a couple of drops of this into one of my little wells on my palette here. 2, 3, let's drop that in there too. And then I'm going to be maddeningly imprecise and add some water. I'm going to start roughly the same amount of water as paint, maybe 4 drops. And I have here a little flat-edged brush, which is going to work perfectly for what I've got in mind. The idea here is we want this to be quite thin. We don't want it to cover perfectly, but we don't want it to be just like a wash. We want it to be a very thin paint, not a glaze. So what I've got there, that's going to be way too thin. So let's add a bit more paint. Now you don't have to test this on yourself. There are these little patches of rubble that's on the miniature, and that's an ideal spot to test your thickness here. And again, I need to add more paint. Now what I'm going to do is go over all of the brickwork and be quite generous with this because we want it to run into the recesses. Now this is not going to look 100% realistic to what an actual brick wall would look like, but what you can do, if you've got the time and inclination, is grab yourself some poly filler or other sort of building gap filler and smear a little bit of it over the top of the bricks once they're dry, and then make sure it's worked into all of the nooks and crannies. And before that dries, you come back with a bit of tissue and wipe it off the surface of the bricks, leaving it in the gaps. Then you get that cool white finish to the mortar on the bricks. It is a fair bit of extra work, I would say. Not the quickest way of doing things, but if you do choose to go that route, it will look cool as hell. There's something to bear in mind. And don't forget, there's two sides to these things. I forgot yesterday while I was actually painting them. So away we go. If you end up with any of it splurging on the walls but you don't want it, just smudge it with your thumb. Now it's important that has plenty of time to dry because you want to be able to pick it up and handle it safely. Now what I've got here is leather brown, and we're really just going to go over any bits and pieces which will look good as wood. Now I might ordinarily paint the shutter in that, but what I'm going to do instead is concentrate on the little bits of debris. You can paint this in any color that you like. Now the damaged shutter here, I'm going to paint in Templegate Teal. You'll see I'm going horizontally across the paint because the layer lines in the print itself, if I'm doing this with my brush, it is going to very quickly ruin your brush. Now I am using little old synthetic brushes. It doesn't matter too much. These are cheap from the stationery aisle. You don't need to destroy them just because you can. So wherever possible, going horizontally across some of these smaller details will just make it easier. Then the finishing couple of touches are actually really simple. We've got some skeleton bone and a larger, softer makeup brush here. Just work that into the bristles, and then, big surprise, just lightly at first, a little bit of skeleton bone over everything. Concentrate towards edges, and these exposed bits of stonework at the corners I think tends to look the best, but it is totally up to you how these look. Particularly on the interior bits, slightly circular motions, same as we did to put the Morghast bone on. You get a kind of funky, almost dusty finish here. And then for the window frames, grab yourself a slightly stiffer brush, and I have here Bony spikes. All I'm going to do is just jam over those bits that I want to look like the window frames. Now in reality, you don't always see window frames painted in a different color to the wall itself, so don't feel like you have to, but I'm doing that so that it matches the rest of my collection so far. And then, I mean, we're done. It's not particularly exciting, but it is super quick. If you want to, once most of that bony stuff is off of your brush, what you can do is just catch the very edge of the building. But yeah, from this point, it's really just mucking around. So I'll make sure that in the description as well, there are the colors for the gray buildings too, if you want to do those. But yeah, the technique is exactly the same. The only difference is that when you're painting the brickwork, you'll probably need to come back and give that a second coat because the Zandri dust that we've started these with works just a little better. And there we go, all laid out on the table with all of its mates. So the individual effect isn't all that impressive. I mean, they're not done badly, but they're not stellar. Thing is, when you put a bunch of them on the table, just as with your armies, they look a lot more interesting, and it certainly beats bare plastic. So a nice quick one today, folks. Just wanted to chuck that one out there for you. If you did see that post on Blue Sky and you wanted to know how I did these, yeah, that's taken me about 2.5 hours to do all of the gray and these beige things together. So not a bad afternoon to finish some scenery for a table. Anyhow, folks, thank you very much for your time, and I will see you next time.